Hello, and welcome back to Code Your English, the channel where you improve your English while discovering powerful ideas that can transform the way you think, work, and live. I'm truly excited to have you here. In today's lesson, we're exploring a topic that affects all of us: busy versus productive. Why working hard isn't the same as winning. As you build your English vocabulary, listening skills, and speaking confidence, you'll also learn practical life lessons about managing your time, focusing on what truly matters, and creating meaningful progress instead of simply staying busy. So grab your notebook, relax, keep an open mind, and let's begin another inspiring English learning journey together. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe and join our growing community of learners from around the world. Let's code your English and your future, one lesson at a time. Have you ever ended a day so full that you couldn't even remember what you had eaten for lunch? And yet, when you tried to think of one single thing you had truly accomplished, your mind went completely blank. Have you ever collapsed onto your sofa at 10 o'clock at night, physically exhausted, mentally drained, and somehow still felt as though the most important task on your list was exactly where you had left it that morning, untouched, waiting, almost mocking you? And have you ever glanced at your to-do list, that long, intimidating column of tasks you wrote so hopefully at dawn, only to realize that it had barely gotten any shorter by the time the sun went down? If any of these situations sound painfully familiar, then you are certainly not alone, because millions of people around the world are trapped in exactly this cycle, convinced that constant motion is the same thing as meaningful progress. In fact, entire generations have been quietly conditioned to equate exhaustion with virtue, as if collapsing into bed each night proved that the day had been worthwhile. We wear our tiredness almost like a medal, a visible sign that we tried hard enough, cared enough, sacrificed enough. And yet, underneath that exhaustion, something troubling often lingers. A nagging, uncomfortable sense that despite everything we did, we never actually moved any closer to the things that genuinely matter to us. Today, we are going to challenge one of the most widespread and dangerous assumptions of modern life: the belief that being busy automatically means being productive. These two words might seem like synonyms at first glance, almost interchangeable in casual conversation. But as we are about to discover together, they represent two completely different ways of living, working, and ultimately, of measuring success. One keeps you in constant, exhausting motion without ever truly arriving anywhere. The other allows you to move more slowly, more deliberately, and yet somehow arrive exactly where you intended to go. By the end of this episode, you will not only have expanded your English vocabulary with powerful natural expressions that native speakers use every single day, but you will also walk away with a genuinely different way of thinking about your own time, your own energy, and your own definition of a life well spent. So take a comfortable breath, silence any notifications that might interrupt you, and let's begin this journey together. What does busy really mean? Before we can properly explore the concept of productivity, we first need to sit with the idea of busyness itself, because most of us throw this word around so casually that we never stop to examine what it actually looks like in practice. Picture someone whose phone buzzes every few minutes with a fresh notification and who feels an almost irresistible urge to check it immediately, interrupting whatever they were doing a moment before. Picture someone who replies to every single message the instant it arrives, treating their inbox as though it were a fire that needed to be extinguished at once. Picture someone whose calendar is so tightly packed with back-to-back meetings that they barely have a moment to breathe, let alone reflect on whether any of those meetings were actually necessary in the first place. This is the portrait of a busy person, someone who works without pause, who juggles dozens of small tasks simultaneously, who proudly announces, "I'm so busy," as though exhaustion itself were a badge of honor. Here is the uncomfortable truth we need to confront. Being busy simply means that your time is full, but a full schedule does not necessarily translate into real, tangible progress. You can spend an entire day in constant motion, answering emails, attending meetings, ticking off dozens of tiny tasks, and still arrive at midnight without having moved a single important project forward. This is precisely why I want you to remember a simple but powerful sentence, one that captures the entire heart of today's lesson. Activity is not always achievement. Being in motion does not guarantee that you are moving in the right direction, and staying occupied does not guarantee that you are building anything of lasting value. Let me paint a more specific picture for you. Imagine a man who works 12 exhausting hours every single day, arriving at the office before sunrise and leaving long after sunset. And yet, if you asked him at the end of the week what he had genuinely accomplished, he would struggle to name even one significant result. He attended every meeting, replied to every message, and never once said no to a request. Yet the one report that could have transformed his career remained unfinished on his desk, buried beneath a mountain of smaller, less meaningful obligations. Does any part of this sound uncomfortably close to your own daily reality? If so, that reaction is entirely intentional, because I want you to genuinely recognize yourself in this description, not so that you feel discouraged, but so that you become aware of a pattern that quietly controls far too many of our lives. Now, before we move any further, let's pause for a moment of interactive practice, because language learning becomes far more powerful when it's active rather than passive. I want you to repeat this sentence aloud, slowly and clearly, paying close attention to your rhythm and pronunciation. Activity is not always achievement. Say it once more, this time with genuine conviction, as though you truly believed it. Now, describe out loud, in your own words, one moment from this past week when you were extremely busy but accomplished very little of real importance. Don't worry about making mistakes. The goal here is fluency and honest reflection, not grammatical perfection. This small act of speaking your own experience aloud, in English, is precisely how genuine language mastery is built, one honest sentence at a time. What does it mean to be truly productive? Now that we have carefully examined what busyness actually looks like, let's turn our attention to its far more valuable cousin, productivity. Productivity does not mean doing more things. It means doing the right things, the ones that genuinely matter, the ones that move your life or your career meaningfully forward. A productive person is someone who works with a clear sense of purpose, who deliberately chooses which tasks deserve their attention, and who measures their day not by how many boxes they checked, but by how much real progress they created. To make this distinction crystal clear, consider the difference between these two mindsets. A busy person might proudly say, "I completed 20 tasks today," listing off a long series of small, forgettable actions as though quantity alone were proof of success. A productive person, on the other hand, might simply say, "I finished the one task that truly mattered," and in that single sentence, you can already sense a completely different philosophy of work, one rooted in focus rather than in frantic movement. This brings us to one of the most important ideas of this entire episode. A sentence I would genuinely encourage you to write down somewhere. You will see it often. Productivity is not about doing more. It is about doing what matters most. There is an old idea, one that stretches back thousands of years to the philosopher Socrates, who spent his life insisting that an unexamined existence is barely worth living at all. Socrates never rushed carelessly from task to task. Instead, he walked slowly through the streets of Athens, asking careful questions, examining his own assumptions, and encouraging others to do precisely the same. His example reminds us that depth of thought has always mattered more than speed of motion. And this ancient wisdom applies just as powerfully to a modern professional staring at an overflowing inbox as it did to a philosopher standing in a crowded marketplace centuries ago. Productivity, understood in this deeper sense, is not merely a modern business concept invented by efficiency experts. It is simply the practical application of a very old truth that a life examined and lived with intention is infinitely richer than a life merely filled with restless motion. Why do we cling to busyness instead of choosing productivity? If productivity is clearly the wiser path, then why do so many intelligent, capable people continue to fill their days with meaningless busyness instead? The answer lies in several deeply human tendencies, and understanding them is the first step toward finally breaking free of their grip. The first reason is a quiet, often unconscious fear of slowing down, because many of us have been taught since childhood that resting equals laziness, and that any moment spent not working is somehow a moment wasted. The second reason is far more emotional than practical. For many people, appearing busy has become tightly connected to their sense of self-worth, as though a packed calendar were proof of their importance. There is a particular kind of quiet satisfaction people feel when they say, almost breathlessly, "I have absolutely no free time this week," because on some subconscious level, they believe that statement translates into, "I am successful, I am needed, I matter." The psychologist Daniel Kahneman spent decades studying the way our minds make decisions, and one of his central discoveries was that our brains naturally prefer fast, automatic thinking over slow, deliberate thinking, because deliberate thinking genuinely requires far more mental energy. Constant busyness, in a strange way, allows us to remain trapped in that fast, reactive mode indefinitely, reacting to whatever appears in front of us, rather than pausing to think carefully about what truly deserves our attention. This is precisely why deep productivity often feels so uncomfortable at first. It demands the slower, more effortful kind of thinking that our exhausted minds instinctively try to avoid. The third reason is simply the overwhelming presence of distraction in our modern world. Social media platforms are engineered to capture our attention for as long as possible. Notifications interrupt our concentration dozens of times an hour, and the constant temptation to check one more message or scroll through one more feed fragments our focus into countless tiny pieces. The fourth reason is poor planning, because without a clear, deliberate structure for the day, absolutely everything begins to feel urgent. And when everything feels urgent, nothing actually gets the deep attention it deserves. And finally, the fifth reason is the widespread difficulty many of us have with saying no. We say yes to every invitation, every favor, every extra responsibility, until our schedule is so completely overloaded that there is no space remaining for the tasks that would genuinely change our lives. Take a moment now, honestly, and ask yourself which of these 5 patterns feels most true for you personally, because recognizing the root cause is always the first step toward meaningful change. Breaking down the biggest myths about productivity. Our culture is filled with convincing but ultimately false beliefs about what it truly means to be productive, and untangling these myths is essential if we want to build genuinely healthier habits. The first myth suggests that busy people are automatically successful people, yet the reality tells a very different story, because many of the most accomplished individuals in history have deliberately worked fewer hours while maintaining an extraordinary depth of focus. The second myth claims that multitasking saves us valuable time, but in truth, constantly switching between different tasks tends to waste far more time than it saves, while simultaneously reducing the overall quality of everything we produce. The third myth insists that working longer automatically means working better, yet exhausted minds consistently make more careless mistakes, think less creatively, and produce noticeably weaker results than well-rested ones. The fourth myth tells us that rest is nothing more than wasted time, an obstacle standing between us and our goals. But neuroscience and psychology both firmly disagree, since adequate rest measurably improves our focus, our creativity, and our capacity for sound decision-making. Think for a moment about how your own brain performs after a genuinely restful night's sleep, compared to how it performs after a night of tossing and turning. The difference in your ability to concentrate, to solve problems, and to remain patient with the people around you is usually dramatic and impossible to ignore. The fifth and final myth claims that we need to feel motivated before we can begin any meaningful task. Yet, in reality, the relationship often works in the opposite direction entirely. Taking action, even a small, imperfect first step, is frequently what generates the motivation to continue rather than the other way around. Countless writers, for instance, describe sitting down to write without any inspiration whatsoever, only to discover that the very act of beginning gradually awakens the motivation they had been waiting for all along. Understanding these 5 myths is genuinely liberating because each one quietly removes a layer of unnecessary pressure from your shoulders. You no longer need to prove your worth through exhaustion. You no longer need to pretend that switching between 10 browser tabs represents genuine efficiency. And you no longer need to wait passively for motivation to magically appear before you finally begin the work that matters. Recognizing the warning signs in your own life. At this point, it becomes genuinely useful to pause and honestly examine whether these patterns of unproductive busyness have quietly taken root in your own daily life. Consider whether you find yourself constantly tired despite sleeping a reasonable number of hours, whether you always seem to be rushing frantically from one obligation to the next, or whether you frequently forget genuinely important commitments simply because your mind is overloaded with too many competing demands. Consider whether you consistently struggle to finish the major, meaningful projects in your life, even while you somehow manage to spend hours upon hours completing small, insignificant tasks that ultimately change nothing. Consider whether you feel stressed almost every single day, whether you work incredibly hard without ever actually seeing tangible progress, or whether you regularly end your day with a heavy, disappointed feeling despite having been in constant motion since the moment you woke up. If several of these descriptions resonate uncomfortably with your own experience, take that recognition seriously, because awareness is always the essential first step toward genuine transformation. The habits that distinguish highly productive people. Having examined the problem thoroughly, let's now shift our focus toward the solution, because highly productive individuals consistently share a specific set of habits that anyone can learn and gradually develop, regardless of their natural personality or starting point. First, they possess an unusually clear understanding of their own priorities, knowing precisely which 2 or 3 tasks would create the greatest impact if completed, rather than treating every item on their list as equally urgent. Second, they invest time in planning before they begin working, rather than diving in reactively and hoping for the best, because a few minutes of thoughtful preparation consistently saves far more time than it costs. Third, they train themselves to focus deeply on a single task at a time, resisting the constant temptation to scatter their attention across multiple competing demands because they understand that divided attention almost always produces diluted results. Fourth, they actively protect their attention from unnecessary interruptions, treating their focus as a precious, limited resource, rather than something to be carelessly given away to every notification or passing request. Fifth, they deliberately build regular breaks into their day, understanding intuitively that sustained performance requires periods of genuine recovery, much like a muscle requires rest between demanding workouts in order to grow stronger. Sixth, they consistently review their day, reflecting honestly on what worked well and what could be improved tomorrow, treating each day as valuable feedback rather than simply letting it disappear unexamined. Seventh, they make a firm habit of completing their most important work first, before exhaustion or distraction has a chance to interfere, recognizing that willpower itself tends to weaken as the day progresses. And eighth, they have learned, often through considerable practice and more than a few uncomfortable conversations, to say no without carrying unnecessary guilt, understanding clearly that every yes given to something unimportant is simultaneously a no given to something that genuinely matters. Practical strategies you can start using today. Understanding these principles intellectually is valuable, but transforming them into daily practice is where real change actually happens. So let's walk through several concrete strategies you can begin implementing immediately. The first strategy involves identifying your single most important task each morning and committing to finishing it before anything else demands your attention. The second strategy, often called time blocking, involves assigning a specific, dedicated block of time to each important task, rather than allowing your day to be shaped entirely by whatever happens to demand your attention in the moment. The third strategy is wonderfully simple. Whenever a task would take less than 2 minutes to complete, do it immediately, rather than allowing it to accumulate into a mountain of tiny, unfinished obligations. The fourth strategy involves deliberately removing distractions from your environment, silencing your phone, closing unnecessary browser tabs, and turning off non-essential notifications so that your attention can remain fully intact. The fifth strategy encourages you to work in focused, uninterrupted sessions, giving your full concentration to one task for a fixed period, followed by a short, deliberate break, before repeating the cycle again. The sixth strategy involves spending just 5 quiet minutes each evening planning the following day, which dramatically reduces the chaotic, reactive feeling that so often defines unproductive mornings. And the seventh strategy asks you to fundamentally change the question you ask yourself at the end of each day. Instead of asking, "Was I busy today?" begin asking instead, "What did I actually finish today?" This single shift in questioning can quietly transform your entire relationship with time. The psychologist Carol Dweck, well known for her extensive research into what she calls the growth mindset, discovered that people who believe their abilities can genuinely improve through consistent effort tend to persist far longer through difficulty than those who believe their abilities are simply fixed traits. This same principle applies beautifully to productivity itself. You do not need to become a perfectly productive person overnight, and in fact, expecting that kind of instant transformation almost always leads to disappointment and quitting. Instead, treat each of these 7 strategies as a small, learnable skill, one you can practice imperfectly at first and gradually strengthen over time, exactly the way you have been strengthening your English throughout this very episode. Before we continue, let's celebrate a small victory together, because recognizing progress along the way keeps motivation alive far more effectively than waiting for some distant, perfect outcome. If you have understood everything we've discussed so far, even with a few unfamiliar words along the way, that itself is genuine progress worth acknowledging. Take a brief moment now and say aloud, in English, one strategy from this list that you personally intend to try tomorrow morning. A story worth remembering. Two co-workers. Two very different paths. Let me tell you a short story that beautifully illustrates everything we have discussed so far, featuring two familiar characters from our Code Your English community, Elif and Tomas, who happen to work at the very same company. Tomas approaches every single day with visible urgency, arriving early, attending every meeting he is invited to without question, and answering every message within minutes of it landing in his inbox. By the time evening arrives, Thomas is utterly exhausted, his mind foggy, his energy completely depleted. And yet, when he honestly reflects on his day, he struggles to identify anything of genuine significance that he actually completed. Elif, meanwhile, approaches her work rather differently. Each morning, before opening her laptop, she takes a few quiet minutes to identify the single task that would matter most if she accomplished nothing else that day. She protects blocks of uninterrupted time for deep focus. She declines meetings that don't genuinely require her presence, and she takes short, deliberate breaks throughout her day, rather than pushing through exhaustion. By the time evening arrives, Elif leaves the office feeling calm rather than depleted, and remarkably, she consistently produces work of a noticeably higher quality than Thomas does. After one full month, the difference between their results becomes impossible to ignore. Thomas has technically worked longer hours, yet his most important project remains frustratingly unfinished, while Elif, working with far greater intention and considerably less visible stress, has completed hers ahead of schedule. The lesson embedded in this simple story is profound. Being calm, focused, and deliberate very often creates dramatically better results than being constantly, frantically busy ever could. The poet Rumi once wrote that the quieter you become, the more you are able to hear. And though he was writing centuries ago about the human soul rather than about modern office life, his words apply with striking precision to Elif's approach to her work. Her quiet, unhurried focus allowed her to hear what actually mattered, amid the noise of competing demands, while Thomas, constantly reacting to whatever shouted loudest for his attention, never found that same clarity. Now that we have seen this contrast so vividly illustrated, let's move forward into a practical daily structure you can begin using immediately, one that will help you become considerably more like Elif and considerably less like an exhausted version of Thomas. Building a simple daily productivity routine. Now let's translate everything we have learned into a straightforward daily rhythm you can begin practicing immediately, starting tomorrow morning. In the morning, take a few quiet minutes to review your genuine goals. Choose the single priority that matters most, and resist the powerful urge to check your phone the very instant you wake up. During your working hours, protect your focus fiercely. Complete your most important task before allowing anything else to steal your attention. And remember to take short, restorative breaks along the way. In the evening, take time to honestly review what you accomplished. Prepare your priorities for the following day, and consciously celebrate even the smallest genuine wins. Because consistent small victories are ultimately what build lasting, meaningful change. Essential vocabulary for discussing productivity. Let's now strengthen your English by exploring some powerful vocabulary connected to everything we've discussed today. The word productive describes work that creates meaningful, valuable results rather than simply consuming time. A priority refers to something you have deliberately decided matters more than other competing demands. Focus describes the mental energy you direct toward a single task, while progress refers to the visible movement you make toward a meaningful goal. Efficiency describes accomplishing something using the smallest reasonable amount of time and effort, while a deadline refers to the specific point in time by which something absolutely must be completed. A routine describes a consistent, repeated pattern of behavior, while distraction refers to anything that pulls your attention away from what genuinely matters. Multitasking describes the attempt to handle several tasks simultaneously, often at the cost of quality, while consistency refers to the steady, reliable repetition of positive habits over time. An achievement describes a meaningful accomplishment you can genuinely be proud of, while balance refers to the healthy relationship between your work and the rest of your life. A goal describes a clear, specific outcome you are working toward, while planning refers to the deliberate process of organizing your actions in advance. Discipline describes the ability to consistently do what you know is beneficial, even when motivation is lacking, while an outcome refers to the final result produced by your efforts. Purpose describes the meaningful reason behind your actions, while a habit refers to a behavior so deeply practiced that it becomes almost automatic. Time management describes the skill of organizing and protecting your hours wisely. And finally, deep work describes the state of intense, undistracted concentration that produces your very best results. Try using 3 or 4 of these words in a sentence about your own life right now, speaking or writing them aloud, because active practice is what transforms passive vocabulary into genuine fluency. Questions worth sitting with. Let's pause here for a moment of honest reflection, and I would genuinely encourage you to answer these questions aloud, treating this as valuable speaking practice as well as personal reflection. What keeps you constantly busy throughout an average day? Which single task, if you're honest with yourself, truly matters most in your current life or career? Do you find yourself multitasking frequently? And if so, in which specific situations does this happen most often? What particular distractions consistently waste the most of your valuable time? During which hours of the day do you personally feel most naturally productive? Which single habit, if you improved it starting tomorrow, would create the greatest positive change in your life? And finally, ask yourself honestly, are the actions filling your days creating genuine activity, or are they creating real, lasting progress? A quick moment of motivation. Before we move into today's challenge, here is a small thought to carry with you. Every single expert you have ever admired, in any field, once struggled through their very first clumsy attempt, exactly the way you are practicing English right now, one imperfect sentence at a time. Progress is rarely dramatic. It is almost always quiet, small, and easy to underestimate in the moment. Trust the process, keep showing up, and let today be one small, honest step forward. Tell us in the comments. Here is a specific question I would genuinely love for you to answer in the comments below, because your answer might be exactly what another listener needs to hear today. Describe, in 2 or 3 full English sentences, the one task you have been avoiding for the longest time, and explain honestly why you think you keep postponing it. Reading your answers is one of my favorite parts of building this community together. So please don't simply say, "Good episode." Give us a real, specific answer we can learn from. Your 7-day productivity challenge. I want to leave you with something genuinely practical. a simple challenge you can begin practicing for the next 7 days. Each morning, choose one single priority that matters more than anything else on your list. Commit to finishing that priority before allowing anything else to interfere. Deliberately limit the distractions competing for your attention throughout the day. Take a few honest minutes each evening to review how your day actually went. Write down one genuine success, however small it might seem, because acknowledging progress reinforces the very behavior that created it. Allow yourself to rest without guilt, understanding that recovery is not the opposite of productivity, but rather an essential ingredient of it. Then simply repeat this same process again tomorrow. Remember that small, consistent actions, practiced patiently over time, are precisely what create lasting, meaningful transformation in anyone's life. Before we close today's episode, I want you to carry one essential truth forward with you. You do not need to work every single hour of every single day. And you certainly don't need to impress the people around you by appearing perpetually busy and overwhelmed. Genuine success comes not from constant motion, but from meaningful, deliberate progress, and small improvements, practiced consistently, are entirely enough to transform your life over time. Productivity is fundamentally about intention rather than speed, and rest, contrary to what our exhausted culture often tells us, is an essential part of truly productive work, not an obstacle standing in its way. Focus, above everything else, on what genuinely matters to you. Your goal was never to fill every single hour of your day. Your goal is to make your important hours count. So starting today, don't simply be busy. Be productive. One single focused step taken today can genuinely change your entire tomorrow. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. If this episode resonated with you, share in the comments which single habit you're planning to change first, and I'll see you very soon in our next episode together.